Today is November 6, 2023. My name is Roxanne Evans, and I'm interviewing Jo Glasco for the Contextualization and Commemoration Initiative. Thank you, Mrs. Glasco, for agreeing to this interview, and it's very nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Mrs. Glasco, this interview is being recorded, and the unedited copy will be housed at UT. Please note, if there's anything you do not wish to discuss, I will certainly honor your wishes. If there are topics you wish to discuss and I've not asked about, please do bring them up. And last, if we need to take a break, for one of us to get a drink of water or any other reason, just let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, let's begin, and let's start with your childhood. Where did you grow up? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And what was your childhood like?
I was born in Dallas, Texas, and I grew up there. I was in Dallas until I left to go to the University of Texas. And it was a segregated environment. I remember going to an elementary school where all of my teachers were African American. All of the students were African American. My mother was a teacher. She was the first Black teacher to integrate the schools in Dallas. And so I just remember having a generally good childhood. I can't complain. There were good friendships formed. We had the support of the community. I felt a good connection with society there. Even though we were living in a segregated environment, we had a very good support system with the teachers, with the churches, just generally socially. It was a good place for us to grow up and have good, strong self-esteem and allow us to venture out into the world. And I was glad to have those teachers. I went to KB Polk Elementary School. We were poor. We lived in the barracks, left over from the some war, and my cousin lived in the Quonset huts. And even though my parents had received their education from Bishop College, they both graduated with bachelor's degrees. We were still in a segregated situation where we were, after we left that housing, we moved into Roseland Homes in North Dallas. My sister was the first African-American child born in Roseland Homes. And my father was the deputy of housing in Dallas, and all of the projects, is what they called them then, were under my father's jurisdiction. And so he would go to North Dallas, South Dallas. A lot of people knew him because of his work with the housing department. So it was a good place to grow up, to give me a good foundation for the rest of my life.
Okay, very good. Now, how would you describe race relations in the broader city of Dallas, outside your immediate school and neighborhood?
I would say that we had racial problems, racial issues. It was not fun being treated like a second-class citizen. I can remember the schools being segregated, with not just the schools, but we would get old books, secondhand books. I remember that, with the pages torn out. I remember segregation when we would go to downtown. We couldn't enter Neiman Marcus or try on clothes. My mother used to go to Sanger Harris. I don't know if that's still there. But it was, you didn't forget that you were an African American. And I can remember my father taking us on a vacation, one of the few we ever had. We were crossing Texas, going into El Paso. And We had checked into a hotel for the night, thinking it would be okay. And a few minutes later, the person in charge of the facility knocked on the door and they said, well, we made a mistake. You can't stay here. We don't have Negroes staying in this hotel, so you'll have to leave. And that was like 1 or 2 in the morning. And we packed up and just drove all the way to El Paso. I'll never forget the look on my father's face and how that affected him as being the head of our family. And he didn't say a word until, the rest of the trip until we got to Los Angeles. Okay. So I could just remember things like that. I remember I was the queen, I was the homecoming queen at Lincoln, Miss Lincoln in 1962. And we were, of course, having a big ball game, and my mother wanted me to wear this suit from Neiman Marcus, and our colors were purple. So she got a lot of her friends worked for Mr. Stanley, Mr. Marcus. And I remember them getting these purple suits, and I was very upset. I didn't want to do it, but that was my mother. And we had to ride up, not the regular elevator, but a service elevator to get to wherever the suits were in a back room. I tried on the suits, and of course, when we did the drive around the Cotton Bowl homecoming, they would announce my suit, and I'm from Neiman Marcus and all, but you just don't forget things like that. I remember my mother cleaning houses, even though she was a school teacher in the summer, and she would go to Highland Park and clean houses. And I remember my dad being working on the side as he wasn't a bartender, but he served parties with this guy. And so they had to do what they had to do in order to make it economically in Dallas.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, you mentioned your schools. Tell me a little bit more about your schools, and particularly the quality of education and how it might have prepared you for college.
The schools were very high quality. Most of the teachers, the African American teachers, were people who had master's degrees. We had teachers who had their PhDs, and they were well respected and accomplished educators, and they were no nonsense about it, and that helped us. I mean, I can remember my English teacher, Miss Mayo at Lincoln High School, teaching us how to conjugate a verb. And I remember the decorum of the teachers, the professionalism, and how they would come prepared as an example for us every day. They would dress very professionally with stockings and heels, and it was a fashion show. No jeans, no, casual, sloppy looks. They were professional. The men all wore suits and ties, and they gave us a sense of pride and a sense of accomplishment that we wanted to emulate. So I was able, and we were able as kids to pick that up. And when we went away to the University of Texas or colleges, then I felt competent. I felt that I could learn it, and I felt that I could do it. And that helped me really throughout life. I think in some ways it was a detriment when the schools integrated, because many of our African American excellent teachers were laid off and not continued in their employment. And I think it diluted the pride, because I taught myself, I taught school, and when I graduated from the University of Texas, I taught at Worthing High School in Houston in Fifth Ward. And it was a whole different, and I integrated, once I taught there for a year, I integrated the schools in Houston. Bel Air High School is what I remember. And the principal, the mayor was Mayor Louis Welch. the mayor of Houston, and his son Shannon was in my 7th grade class. And it just was a different environment. You know, it was a time for civil rights advocacy and change was coming. And so we were able to ride along with it and make things better.
Great. Now, let me ask you what you heard about UT Austin before you came to school here. What was the university's reputation like in your community in Dallas?
I really didn't know anything about the University of Texas growing up. I remembered SMU because that was in Dallas, and my mother went to North Texas State University and got her master's. A lot of the teachers went there. But I didn't know anything much about the University of Texas. The first time I found out and looked into UT was when I found out that as a valedictorian or salutatorian, you could get a full scholarship there for tuition. And because of that, my guidance counselor, Ms. Chandler, advised me that I might want to look into going to the University of Texas. And so I did, and I decided it would be a good opportunity. And I was amenable to going there. It was close to home, and it was, you know, a free ride. And so I was happy to get in and to go to the university, but I had no idea what was in store, what it was going to be like.
Okay. Well, tell me if you how much you knew about the Heman Sweat versus Painter case, and did your community participate in it or follow it in any way that you're aware of?
I knew about Sweat v. Painter. My mother knew, I think she knew the Sweat family, and I just knew that the University of Texas was segregated when I went there. I went there in 1966, and that was the law school that Sweat v. Painter case, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that he had to sit outside, and he was excluded from participating with the law school under that separate but equal doctrine. And so finally, I believe that they did have to integrate the law school. But the University of Texas, when I came, it was pleasant in the sense that the African American students had a really good socialization process with other African Americans. All the black girls lived in either Whitus Hall or Almetri's dorm. And so we were right next to each other, and we all knew each other. We socialized together. We were inducted into our sororities and fraternities together. It was really a cocoon, so that even though we went out into the campus during the day, we could come back to our dormitories and relax and have support. And I remember to this day all the fun we used to have in the dormitories. And I remember we didn't have a kitchen, and they would cook our food across the street in Kinsolving and bring it over to us. And I remember seeing those trays across the street, and it was not a welcoming environment. I mean, people were not friendly. They didn't really speak. I mean, I went to classes, and I felt that I was being judged and singled out sometimes because of my race, because it could be a class of 40 or 50 people, but the professor would know my name. He would know who I was, or she would know who I was. And I can remember getting the blue books. We used to write essays in blue books. And it was always stigma with African American students that you couldn't write. And So I would do the blue book, and the professor would just red ink it here and there, and this isn't right and all, and then put it up, and you could see that, you could easily have gotten a low self-esteem, but based upon my upbringing and my training that I had already received, I was determined that I wasn't going scholastic probation and I was not going to go home. Because a percentage of the African American students did have to leave. I can't remember what the percentage was, but it was a challenge. But I kept going with it, and soon I realized the type of writing style that they were looking for, and I was able to fit that formula.
Excellent, excellent. Now, did you take a UT entrance exam prior to being admitted? Do you recall?
I cannot remember taking an entrance exam.
Okay. Okay. Now, how did your family feel about you coming to UT? It wasn't too far from home, but it was a little ways.
No, they drove me there, and they were excited for me. And they encouraged me. They would send me money and spending change, and my sister followed behind me. She was 3 years after me, and my parents were happy and proud that I was there, and I did the best that I could because I felt that I was getting a quality education, not just with the scholastically, but also environmentally, because it was necessary for me to meet with different cultures, different races, different economic environments. And it cultivated me so that by the time I was graduating, I felt that I was comfortable to go into the world. And the University of Texas nationally has a stellar reputation, so it didn't hurt my career, to have a degree from UT.
Exactly. Now, what were your first impressions when you arrived on campus for the first time?
I just remember moving into the dorm and, meeting my roommate. And I remember going to places like Zilliqa Park and what was that strip they called the
drag?
The drag. I remember going to the drag, and we would stick together, the Black students, and we would go to some of the games. But the games at that time, the University of Texas athletic department was segregated.
Yes.
And there weren't any African American athletes on the team. Mm-hmm. And I remember the coach was Daryl Royal. And I remember, I think the quarterback was Scott Appleton or something like that. And it seemed to be an attitude that Texas was number one. And because of that, we don't necessarily need the African American athlete. Now, I was on the Human Rights Committee for UT. And I remember going to meetings, trying to get diversity and that type of thing. And it was just not a welcoming environment. I mean, you would see students that you knew were in your class, they would pass right by you and look through you and wouldn't speak. And I would see a lot of students were there from the Mideast, like Iran, and I guess because of the oil and gas, and they looked like African Americans, and you were thinking, oh, brother or sister. But then you would speak, and you would realize they're from the Mideast. And I just had a bad taste. I remember when the guy went up on the tower, Whitman, I think was his name, and shot up a lot of people over the summer. But, like I majored in home economics and clothing and textiles, and they would have partners. And everybody had a partner, but who? Me.
Wow.
And when we integrated the housing, during my sophomore year, my parents got a call from the Board of Regents, a representative, and asked them if they would mind if I would integrate the dormitories. And my parents agreed, and they'd asked me, it was not a lot of decision making, and I said I would try it. And there were 5 of us, and we were called the Texas Five. I have a couple of articles that were written, covering us nationally. And so we moved into Kinsolving during my sophomore year. And it was not a pleasant experience. We were isolated. I mean, it's a strange feeling to feel that you're just not included or even looked at or thought about. So we would eat all of our meals together at that table. 5 Black girls, and none of the white girls would sit with us or encourage us to sit with them or anything like that. And it was just a hostile environment. They would do things like put dead birds in front of our room, knock on the doors and 2 or 3 in the morning and run, and put notes on our door. So after that 1 year, I was just not ready to continue with that. And I felt better going back to the Black dorm, and that's what I did. And some of the Black other girls stayed because we were in a suite of 4, 2 Black girls on each side. And then they had 1 Black girl with a room by herself. So some of them kept on and stayed at Kinsolving, but I chose to go back to the Black dorm. And I never really felt that was my school. I didn't feel like I was a part of it. And so I said when I left UT, I was not coming back. And I didn't go back for 50 years. I didn't go back. I mean, I remember things like we had a derby day. And that's when the fraternity, this white fraternity, had this game where you would go and try to grab as many derbies as you could and put it on, your head. And our sorority, and I was an AKA, and the fraternities, we all competed. And one of my sorority sisters grabbed a derby off this guy, little white guy. And he turned around and beat her and hit her like nobody's business. And it was in the papers, and it was covered, but it was just something that was in the environment, and nobody was trying to make a difference, to make a change. I mean, Lyndon Johnson was the president, and Linda Bird was in our dormitory. I never saw her, but I heard she was there. I did see her, though. And I'm not holding anything against her personally, but, I just thought we were being used for that integration. And, hopefully it continued and it became a regular thing after we were the first to do it.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Glasgow. Now, going back to when you were admitted, do you recall having to take a swimming test for physical education? And if so, what were some of your memories of that?
I remember a swimming test. I know the first Black students entered UT in 1956, I believe. And so by the time I entered in 1962, maybe some of the things had changed, but I just wanted to be recognized to give a lot of credit to those first students, because they weren't able to live on campus. They were not able to have a dormitory room. And so they had to live off campus and commute to go to UT or live in private apartments. I'm going to close, this light is coming in. I'm going to close this
Okay.
blind just for a second, please.
Okay.
That's not much better.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on. Tell me a little bit more about what some of your classroom interactions were like.
Well, like I said, I mean, it was just so interesting to me that all the professors knew who I was. They had the big rooms where you would sit up, just maybe 100 students in there. And they would all know me, my name. And after we would do our essays and I would write in the blue books, I made it a point to go and ask them. I wouldn't just go by their corrections of me. I would ask them specifically what I could do to do better the next time. And, some of them were good and some of them, it was just the spirit of thinking that you're not up to it, that predisposition to think that, what are you doing here and who are you to be here? It wasn't a good feeling, a good spirit at that school. And my home economics teachers were very nice to me, very supportive. I can remember them, showing some support for me. And, just all in all, being good ladies, very kind people. But I don't know, I just didn't feel, I didn't feel like I was really, included in the school. So, and I wasn't alone. We all stuck together. We were in a segregated environment, but we would have our sorority events and we would have our programs, and we would go to Houston-Tillotson sometimes to socialize. And we knew some of the people in Austin, and we would go off campus and meet with the NAACP and do some picketing. And, some of us did, some of them, I didn't do a sit-in, but with the human relations group, we did take steps to try to help with desegregation as much as we could. But that was during the 60s, and it was just really a time for civil rights. We were coming into this idea that, we were Black and proud. And that kind of helped with knowing who we were and the foundation that we already had growing up. It was really helpful. But I can just remember some of the students would be so upset because they had to leave. And these are kids who were the valedictorians and salutatorians, because I don't know why this number 318 sticks in my mind as the number of Black kids on campus when I was there.
318?
Now I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, because that was more than 50 years ago.
Okay, you're probably pretty
but
close.
I just remember everybody you met there was a valedictorian, a salutatorian, and they were from all over the state. And to this day, I could remember some of them. I remember this guy who integrated rice. Johnson was his last name. Very brilliant guy. He actually lives here in Columbia now.
Oh.
And I remember my girlfriend Anita Mitchell, who was, I think she was the first Orange Jacket, and I remember Farrah Fawcett being on the cheerleaders, and she was, I think, the first African American spook, and so I remember James Means running track. We called him brother, and he was the first. Probably one of, I think they honored him for being the first athletic guy to integrate the track team and so on.
Yes, he was honored just recently, within the past several months.
Yes, Miss Bertha Means was his mother, and she was quite an outstanding civic leader, active in the NAACP.
Yes.
And we knew Miss Means and Janet, the whole family, from being in Jack and Jill when we were in junior high school.
Okay.
So it was a good group to work with and to try to make things better with.
Now, you touched on some of the political climate at the time. Were there political events going on outside of Texas, around the country, that really captured your attention or that students spent time talking about?
I remember, seemed like I remember working on some political campaigns. Ralph Yarborough, I remember that name. We worked, I think he was a Democrat. I remember George Bush actually was, in his early years, was a liberal. Maybe he was Republican, but seemed like I remember even working on his campaign. So I can remember working in some political events around town, going to meetings, that kind of thing.
Okay, excellent. Now, what were some of the spaces on campus where you felt most welcomed?
I guess I could, like I said, the dormitories. We always had our own group, when we would go off campus, it would be 2 or 3 of us. We would never go out without a group or two. And I just remember the tower and how pretty it was at night. And like I said, Zilliqa, is it Zilliqa Park?
Zilker Park, yes.
Zilliqa Park. I remember going there and having cookouts and picnics and stuff. And I remember going over to Houston-Tillotson, going to parties there. And we would have our own social activities. We would have our sorority lines. We had Delta Sigma Theta and the AK Alpha. And then the guys had the Alpha Phi Alpha group, and they had Kappa Alpha Psi. And I'm not sure, they may have had Omega Psi Phi. I just don't remember that. But we would have our formal affairs, and we would have our parties, and just a typical college scene, but only was all black socialized. We had one girl, Mary Poston, in our dorm, and she was white. And Mary wanted to be an AKA, and we inducted her into our AKA society. She was more like, I think she was working for the university there or something, but she was a very good-hearted girl. And so I remember Mary, we made Mary an AKA.
All right.
I wonder where she is now. Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a
Mary
story.
was more like a hippie kind of girl, but she learned our songs and the pledges, and we took her over the burning sands. That's what we called it.
Right.
She was a good girl. Yeah.
Nice story.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned this before, but I'm going to ask in a different way. What were some of the places you felt most excluded during your time as a student?
The football games, the classrooms, just walking around campus. I mean, how you feel when people are in your class and they sit right next to you, and then you see them, or they're in your dormitory and you see them outside, and you say hi and they look straight ahead like you're not even there.
That's a painful feeling.
It's a painful feeling. Mm-hmm. It's a painful feeling. You feel like you were nothing and nobody, because you were not a part. They had their fraternity row there. They may still have it, and all the white guys were in fraternities, and the sorority sisters would, they had their own social activities.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you.
We did have one girl in our dorm who fraternized with the Mideast guys, and she was an African American girl, but they made her Miss Scheherazade one year. I never forget that.
Wow.
So that was her group.
Interesting.
I've forgotten her name.
Well, let me ask you a question about the football games. Did students have to sit in segregated areas in the stadium? Do you recall?
I didn't really go to the games because there weren't any black players.
Yeah.
And you just didn't feel like, Texas fight. I mean, we could see on TV and stuff, but I wasn't encouraged to see Devo and all of that. I didn't especially want to go. I mean, some of us went up for OU weekend, though, a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. I don't imagine the climate lent itself to a lot of school spirit if you're in a segregated environment.
I said when I finished UT, I was never coming back. And I didn't go back until my 50th year reunion. And the reason I went back is because I was getting communication from the school where they had an outreach, and it sounded like they were trying to make amends. And I got this beautiful engraved invitation in orange and white, our colors. And I said, well, if I'm going to go back, this is the year I'm going to go. And so I did go back. And I saw some friends I hadn't seen in 50 years. I was surprised there weren't more black students there for that reunion. But I did see maybe 5 or 6 that were in my class, and that was great to see them.
That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned the Human Relations Commission that you were on here at UT.
It was called, the Human Relations Committee.
Committee, okay. What were some of the other campus organizations or groups that you were involved in? You mentioned the sororities. Were there others?
What else was I in?
Pardon?
I'm trying to think what else was I in, because just to stay there required a lot of studying.
Yeah.
So we would bring our books, and I remember going in the cafeteria after hours. Some of us would be there at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, because we had tests coming up and, like I said, we didn't want to go on probation.
Right. I understand that.
Mhm.
Looking back, how do you think coming to UT and spending time here affected you?
I think it made me at a certain point feel like I don't even want to try to integrate anymore. I don't, because it has to be a two-way street. It has to be, you're not the one always explaining your culture or asking people to find out who you are or respect you. It has to be a two-way street. And I have more respect for UT than I did then, just for the fact that you're doing this and that people are at the school have an outreach going where they're trying to make amends. But I would like for more honesty to be shared when they're doing, like they're doing a project to honor the graduates of 1956. And I would like, UT has it has a lot of amends to make, because the state of Texas, I mean, I can't even think about going back to Texas with the attitudes that they have, some of them. So it's like, you live the best life you can on a daily basis and you try to love people and all, but you have to, people need to, of all races, need to meet each other halfway. It can't be, I'm the one gravitating toward you to ingratiate myself to you. It should be white people looking at themselves and their culture and their environment to say, what is it that we can do to ingratiate ourselves to the African American community? And many of them are not willing to do that. It's just this idea of white supremacy has been ingrained in our culture. And it's so sad because it's still going on. And it's not talked about and it's not acknowledged, but it's there. And sometimes I look at America and I think, you're willing to lose democracy, and the white race is the one benefiting the most from democracy. I mean, a lot of black people are poor in ghettos and, underprivileged and outcast society. But it seems like this issue of race is not going to go away. But hopefully, some people will realize I'm benefiting from this system the most. And if democracy goes down, then who's going to suffer the most? But they're willing to support political candidates and so forth who don't believe in democracy. So I do the best that I can day by day, as a Christian, to be kind to people. And, just stay in prayer the best we can do. because we're going through some turbulent times. And I don't know, Texas is just, I'm here in Maryland. It's not a panacea, but I just feel bad, for Texas, and I just know there's no way I can come back there to live.
Understand. That's well stated. I understand. Now, you mentioned that having a degree from UT, might have, helped jumpstart your career. So tell us a little bit about your career and how you think a degree from UT might have helped you.
UT is well respected nationally, and really is at the top, university with the top universities. And so, because of UT, I was able to. After UT, I went to law school and got a law degree from Texas Southern University in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the UT education, I think I was chosen to be the first teacher, one of the first Black teachers to integrate the schools in Houston. And I also felt that it gave me an opportunity to do training I was majoring in home economics. I was going to be a fashion designer, and I had a chance to Foley's department store. I had a chance to be in the executive training program there. And I think UT helped me with that. And when I finished law school, I think my degree helped me to get a job with the federal government and the Office of General Counsel of Health, Education, and Welfare here in the DC area. And I think that opened doors for me to start my legal career. And it's been a good degree to have. And I have friends up here. I was talking to them recently. One of my friends is on the Supreme Court of Maryland, who finished from University of Texas Law School, of African-American girl. Uh-huh. And I took a picture. We did our Hook 'em Horns picture. So I would like for the alumni to have it and put on a magazine or whatever they do. And we had one of your professors at the law school, Professor Browning, took it upon himself to research African Americans who have been denied the opportunity to be sworn in as lawyers because of their race. And he found this guy who in 1866 was denied the chance to become a lawyer and to be sworn in, although he passed the bar. His name is Draper. He passed the bar, but because he was Black, they wouldn't swear him in. And so he was posthumously sworn in about 2 weeks ago at the Court of Appeals.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So we had our 3 Texas grads doing our Hook 'em Horns there.
I would love to see that picture if you could make a copy and share it.
Yeah, I would love to. If you send me your cell phone, I'll send it to you.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Wow. Now, you say you've been back once, so can you share how you think conditions might have changed for African American students now as opposed to when you were here?
I couldn't believe it when I went back. I'm so glad that I went back because we went to a game, a football game. There had to be maybe 300 Black students out there. It was a section, and all the Black kids were sitting together with their UT paraphernalia on. And it just warmed my heart. And they introduced the graduates who were there by years. And when they came to the graduates in the 60s in our class, they just gave us a resounding ovation.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So I said, Texas, okay. You're moving on.
Moving on, okay. Do you think conditions are better or easier for students now as a result of just over a period of time, the way things have changed?
You know, I'm not sure because I don't keep in touch with the students. I was just impressed with the volume of Black students there. And I look at the alumni. They used to have something online. I would see it all the time. And I mean, just to have a section devoted to diversity, that's impressive. And to have African Americans represented in all areas of life for the students. I think that's a good start.
That is. Well, Mrs. Glasgow, is there anything else you'd like to share? Maybe something that I didn't ask that you'd like to share?
I would like to share that I hope that UT finds a way, in spite of the Supreme Court decision, where they don't include questions about race, or you can't ask about race in the application process. I hope they will read that decision and find a way to include African American students and to keep those scholarships coming to those kids and to keep getting them to try and come there, you know, because it's predicted that the numbers are going to fall significantly for African American enrollment because of that Supreme Court decision. So I hope UT finds a way to continue to pursue the act of inclusion and diversity and to make it more palatable to the African American students.
Well, Mrs. Glasgow, that hope for UT seems like a fitting place to end our discussion today, and I certainly thank you for your time and for your very thoughtful answers. I truly appreciate it, and I enjoyed talking with you.